It seemed like just another ordinary day until a mother heard a sentence from her little daughter that made her heart pound. The young girl smiled innocently and said, "I was at Daddy's house." At first, the mother was surprised, but within seconds, a wave of panic washed over her face. She knew exactly who her daughter meant by Daddy, and the realization sent a shiver down her spine. Meanwhile, across town, a young black teen stood at a crowded bus stop, lost in his own thoughts. As the bus arrived, he stepped inside and noticed a pregnant white woman struggling to find a seat. The bus was nearly full, and exhaustion was visible on her face. For a moment, she glanced around, but no one seemed willing to give up their spot. Without hesitation, the young man stood up and said, "Please, take my seat." The woman's eyes widened slightly, as if she wasn't expecting such kindness. She smiled, murmured a soft thank you, and sat down. But no one on that bus, especially not the young man, could have guessed what was about to happen next. As the bus rumbled forward, the woman kept glancing at the teen, her expression unreadable. Something about him made her pause, made her think. Finally, as her stop approached, she reached into her purse, pulled out a small piece of paper, scribbled something on it, and handed it to him. "Take this, son, this will change your life." There was something in her voice, something serious, something powerful. The young man stared at the folded note in his hands. And the moment he opened it, his eyes widened in shock. Who exactly was the daddy that had sent a mother into panic? And what was written on that mysterious note that had the power to change a life forever? The story is just beginning. The young man's hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the note. His eyes moved across the words, but for a moment, his brain refused to process what he was reading. His heart pounded against his ribs. The noise of the bus, the chatter of passengers, the hum of the engine, it all faded into the background. He read the note again, just to make sure he wasn't imagining things. The pregnant woman had already stepped off the bus, disappearing into the crowd. He looked outside the window, hoping to catch another glimpse of her, but she was gone. His fingers tightened around the small piece of paper as his mind raced. Who was she? And how did she know something that could supposedly change his life? Meanwhile, the mother sat on her couch, gripping her phone tightly. Her daughter was playing on the floor, humming softly, completely unaware of the storm building in her mother's chest. The woman's fingers hovered over the screen as she debated what to do. Should she call someone? Confront the person her daughter had called Daddy? Her breathing was unsteady. She had worked so hard to keep that part of her life buried. And now, out of nowhere, her little girl had unknowingly dug it back up. She needed to stay calm. Panicking wouldn't help, not yet. She swallowed hard and turned to her daughter. "Sweetheart," she said gently, trying to keep her voice light. "Tell me again, where did you go today?" The little girl looked up, her big innocent eyes blinking. "I told you, Mommy. I went to Daddy's house." She said it so casually, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. The mother forced a smile. "And who took you there?" The girl thought for a moment, then shrugged. "I don't know. He just came to get me." Her pulse spiked. He? Who was he? Her mind jumped to the worst possibilities. "Did he say his name?" she asked, her voice still calm but her grip on the phone tightening. The child shook her head. "No. But he was really nice." A cold shiver ran down her spine. Nice. That didn't mean safe. That didn't mean okay. She needed to figure out who had been with her daughter. And fast. Back on the bus, the young man finally stuffed the note into his pocket, realizing that his stop was coming up. He pulled the cord, signaling the driver to let him off. As soon as he stepped onto the sidewalk, he took a deep breath. The city buzzed around him, people moving in every direction, cars honking, voices blending into a chaotic melody. He pulled the note out again and read it for the third time. The words stared back at him, their meaning sinking in deeper with each passing second. "I know who you are. And I know what you did. Call this number." Beneath the message was a phone number. No name. No explanation. Just those chilling words. His stomach twisted. What did she mean? He had never seen that woman before in his life. And what could he have possibly done? He wasn't a troublemaker. He kept to himself. Went to school. Worked his part-time job. Stayed out of trouble. So why did it feel like someone had just put a weight on his chest? He walked home, his thoughts a whirlwind. Should he call the number? What if it was some kind of scam? Or worse, what if it wasn't? His mother was waiting for him when he walked in the door. "Hey, baby," she said, looking up from the kitchen counter. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." He hesitated. "Yeah, I'm fine," he said quickly, forcing a small smile. "Just a long day." She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. "Dinner's almost ready," she said instead. "Thanks, Ma," he mumbled and headed to his room. As soon as he shut the door, he pulled out his phone. His fingers hovered over the keypad, the note still clenched in his other hand. Should he call? On the other side of town, the mother had finally made her decision. She pulled up a number on her phone and hit dial. The line rang twice before a voice answered. A voice she hadn't heard in a long time. "Hello." She froze. The voice was deeper now, rougher. But it was him. "Who are you?" she asked, her throat dry. A pause. Then, "You already know." Her stomach dropped. She forced herself to take a breath. "Did you take my daughter?" Silence. And then, "Finally, we need to talk." Her grip on the phone tightened. "No," she said firmly. "You need to stay away from us." A sigh on the other end. "I think it's too late for that." Her heart pounded in her ears. Across town, the young man's finger finally pressed the call button. The phone rang once. Twice. Then someone picked up. "Hello." The same voice. The same weight. The young man's throat went dry. "Ah. I got a note. From a lady on the bus." Silence. "And then I was hoping you'd call." Both stories were unfolding, two different lives caught in something far bigger than they realized. And neither of them had any idea just how deep this mystery would go. The young man gripped his phone tighter, his breath uneven. The voice on the other end of the line was calm, almost too calm, like someone who had been expecting this moment for a long time. "Who are you?" the teen asked, his voice low, uncertain. A pause. Then the voice responded, not over the phone. "We need to meet." Meet. The idea sent a chill through him. His instinct screamed at him to hang up, to forget about the note and move on. But something inside him, a deep, unsettling curiosity, wouldn't let go. Whoever this person was, they knew something about him. Something important. "Why should I trust you?" he asked, trying to sound firm. The voice exhaled, like someone tired of playing games. "Because," the person said, "if you don't, you'll never know the truth. And trust me, you need to know." The young man hesitated, his mind racing. Every part of him knew this was crazy. But before he could stop himself, he whispered, "Where?" The voice gave him an address. A coffee shop, not too far from where he lived. "Tomorrow. Noon. Come alone." The line went dead. He stared at his phone, his heart still pounding. He could just ignore this. Pretend it never happened. But deep down, he knew he wouldn't. Across town, the mother sat frozen, the phone still pressed against her ear. The man on the other end had been silent for too long. She felt her pulse in her throat. "You don't get to come back into our lives," she finally said, her voice shaking with anger. "Not now. Not ever." A low chuckle came through the speaker. "You always were stubborn," he said. "But this isn't about what you want anymore." She gritted her teeth. "Stay away from my daughter." Another pause. Then, the words that made her blood run cold, "I already have." Her breath hitched. She gripped the phone tighter. What does that mean? But the line was already dead. Panic shot through her. She turned to her daughter, who was still playing on the floor, humming to herself, completely unaware of the storm swirling around her. Had he been near her? Had he seen her? Had he? No. She couldn't let herself spiral. Not yet. She had to think. She had to figure out what he wanted. The next morning, the young man barely touched his breakfast. His mother noticed. "You feeling okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he lied, pushing his food around his plate. He left the house early, walking in the crisp morning air, trying to clear his head. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He didn't even know what he was hoping to find. But something about this didn't feel like a coincidence. When he reached the coffee shop, he hesitated outside the door. His heart pounded. What if this was a mistake? Before he could change his mind, he stepped inside. The place was quiet, a few customers scattered at tables. His eyes scanned the room. And then, a woman. Sitting at a corner table. It was her. The pregnant woman from the bus. She looked up, her expression unreadable. Then she gestured for him to sit. He swallowed hard and walked over. "You came," she said. He nodded slowly, pulling out the chair. "Who are you?" She folded her hands on the table. "Someone who knows more about you than you think." His chest tightened. "That doesn't answer my question." She sighed. "You don't remember me, do you?" He frowned. "I've never seen you before." She gave a sad smile. "Not since you were a baby." His heart skipped a beat. "What?" She slid a photograph across the table. He hesitated before picking it up. His stomach clenched when he saw it. A woman, much younger, holding a baby. A man stood next to her. And the baby. It was him. He looked up, his mouth dry. "Who is this?" Her eyes softened. "Your real mother." His vision blurred for a moment. "That's not possible," he whispered. "My mom loves you," she finished for him. "And she raised you well. But she's not the woman who gave birth to you." The world seemed to tilt. "No. No, that's not true." She didn't argue. Just watched him, letting him process. His hands clenched the photo. "Then who are you?" She hesitated. "Your sister." His breath left his lungs. Meanwhile, the mother paced her living room, trying to fight off the fear gnawing at her. She couldn't sit still. She needed to do something. Then she made a decision. She grabbed her keys and her coat. She was going to find him. Before he found them first. The young man sat frozen, his pulse hammering in his ears. The words echoed in his mind. "Your sister." That couldn't be true. He had no sister. He had no other family besides his mother. His mother, the woman who had raised him, loved him, protected him. She had never mentioned anything like this. Never even hinted at it. His grip tightened around the photo. "You're lying." The woman, his so-called sister, sighed, her expression filled with something he couldn't quite read. Was it sadness? Regret? "I wish I were," she said softly. He shook his head, his body tense. "No. My mom loves you," she interrupted. "And I know this is a lot. But it's the truth. You weren't supposed to find out like this." His breathing was uneven. He felt like the ground beneath him was shifting. If this was true, then everything he knew about himself was a lie. His sister leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Listen to me. There's more. And you need to hear it before it's too late." Too late for what? His voice came out sharper than he intended. She hesitated, glancing around the cafe as if checking for someone. Then she slid another piece of paper across the table. "He's looking for you." His stomach twisted. "Who?" She hesitated. "Our father." His breath caught in his throat. His father. But that made no sense. His father was never in the picture. His mother had told him that much. She had raised him on her own. She had never spoken about him, never let him wonder. "I don't have a father," he said flatly. His sister's expression darkened. "You do. And he's closer than you think." A chill ran down his spine. Meanwhile, the mother gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white as she drove through the city streets. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She needed to get to him before it was too late. She didn't know how much he had learned, how much had been revealed, but she knew one thing: he couldn't meet him. Not now. Not ever. She had spent years keeping her son safe, making sure he never knew the truth. Because the truth, it was dangerous. Her mind raced. She tried calling him again, but no answer. Panic clawed at her chest. Where was he? She didn't slow down. She had to find him. Back at the cafe, the young man's hands were shaking. His sister watched him carefully. "He's been looking for you for years," she continued. And now that he knows where you are, he won't stop. The words sent a shudder through him. Why? What does he want? She hesitated. Then, finally, she whispered, you. His throat went dry. Me? She nodded. You don't understand. You were never supposed to leave. He never wanted to let you go. His pulse pounded. My mom took me. The idea felt foreign, impossible. His mother would never do something like that. She had always been kind, loving, gentle. His sister looked at him with something almost like pity. She saved you. He swallowed hard, his mind spinning. If that was true, if his mother had really taken him away from his father, what had she been running from? Before he could say another word, the door to the cafe swung open. His mother stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room frantically. The moment she saw him sitting at the table, her expression changed. Relief flickered across her face, followed by fear. Then she saw the woman sitting across from him. And her entire body went rigid. The young man turned, confused. Mom! His mother's gaze locked onto his sister. Her voice was barely a whisper. No. His sister slowly stood. Hello, Sarah. His mother shook her head, her entire body trembling. You shouldn't be here. The young man looked between them, confusion twisting in his gut. You know her. His mother's eyes flickered to him, filled with a desperate plea. Come with me. Now. His sister didn't move. He deserves to know the truth. His mother's voice broke. Not like this. The young man's breath caught. This was real. This wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. His mother knew. And that meant everything his sister had said, it wasn't just possible. It was true. But before he could say anything, the cafe door opened again. A tall man stepped inside. His presence alone seemed to shift the energy in the room. He was broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothes, his face partially shadowed by the dim lighting. His gaze swept across the room before landing on the three of them. The young man's blood ran cold. Because something in that man's face, his eyes, the sharpness of his jaw, the intensity in his stare felt hauntingly familiar. The man smiled. Son. The room fell into silence. His mother's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist, her grip tight, desperate. Don't listen to him. His sister's voice was quiet but firm. He's your father. His breath hitched. The walls seemed to close in around him. And for the first time in his life, he didn't know who to trust. The young man felt his whole world tilting. The cafe seemed smaller, suffocating, the air thick with tension. His mother's grip on his wrist tightened, her nails digging into his skin as if she could anchor him there, keep him from slipping away. His sister stood still, her expression unreadable, but her eyes flickered with something that unsettled him, something close to regret. And then there was him. The man who had just stepped inside. The man who had called him son. His chest tightened, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. He wanted to speak, but his throat felt dry, his voice stuck somewhere deep inside him. He didn't know this man. He had never seen him before in his life. But something about the way the man looked at him, like he was already his, made him shudder. His mother finally found her voice, though it was barely above a whisper. You don't get to do this. The man's gaze didn't leave the young man. I think we both know that's not up to you anymore. His mother flinched. He saw it, the way her fingers trembled, the way her body stiffened like she was bracing for something. And that terrified him. His sister exhaled, breaking the silence. He deserves the truth. His mother's jaw clenched. Not from him. The young man couldn't take it anymore. Stop. His voice came out louder than he intended, his hands balling into fists on the table. He turned to his mother first. You've been lying to me my whole life. You kept all of this from me. And now you expect me to just, what? Walk away like none of this matters. His mother looked at him, her eyes pleading. I did it to protect you. From what? Her silence was deafening. He turned to his sister. And you, why now? Why after all these years? She hesitated. Because you were supposed to be safe. But he found you. His gaze snapped back to the man, his supposed father. And you? What do you want from me? The man's lips curved into a slow, unsettling smile. Just to take back what's mine. His stomach dropped. Something about the way he said it sent a chill through his bones. His mother was shaking her head. No. No, you can't have him. You don't get to take him back. The man's eyes darkened. You stole him from me, Sarah. His mother's face paled, and the young man felt his blood run cold. Stole? His sister swallowed hard. You didn't know, did you? His head spun. Know what? The man took a slow step forward. That she kidnapped you. His entire body went still. The cafe was silent. The world around him blurred, his heartbeat roaring in his ears. That wasn't true. It couldn't be true. His mother wasn't capable of something like that. She had always been good, always been the one person he could trust. He turned to her, his voice barely a whisper. Tell me he's lying. Tears welled in her eyes, her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, needed to, but the words never came. His stomach twisted. Mom. Still, nothing. And that was when he knew. A deep, suffocating silence settled over him. His hands shook as he pushed himself up from the table, stepping back like he needed distance from all of them. I need to go, he mumbled, his mind racing. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he had to get away. But before he could take another step, his father grabbed his arm. You're not running from this. His mother lunged forward. Let him go. The man didn't budge. His grip was firm but not painful. I won't hurt you, he said, looking directly into his son's eyes. I just want you to hear me out. The young man's breath hitched. He could feel his mother's panic, hear it in every shaky breath she took. His sister didn't move, didn't interfere. He wanted to run. He wanted to scream. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure what he was running from. Or worse, what he had already been running from his whole life. The young man's chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. His father's grip on his arm was firm but not forceful, yet it felt like an anchor, keeping him trapped in a moment he wasn't ready to face. His mother's voice trembled with desperation, her hands reaching for him like she could pull him back to the safety of what once was. And his sister, she just stood there, watching, like she had already accepted the inevitable. His body tensed, his mind screaming for an escape, but his feet refused to move. He looked up at the man, at his father, and for the first time, he really studied him. There was something unsettlingly familiar in his face, in the sharp angles of his jaw, in the deep-set eyes that held something dark, something unreadable. You need to let me go, the young man finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. His father hesitated for a brief moment before loosening his grip. If you walk away now, you'll never know the truth. His mother grabbed his hand. You don't need his truth. You know who you are. That's all that matters. But did he? His entire life had been built on a story his mother told him, a story he had never questioned. And now, that story was crumbling. He wasn't sure what was left beneath it. His throat felt dry. Just tell me why, he said, looking at his mother. Why did you take me? Tears spilled down her cheeks. Because I had to. That's not an answer. She squeezed his hands, her eyes searching his for understanding. I didn't steal you, she whispered. I saved you. His pulse pounded. Saved me from what? Her gaze flickered toward his father, and for the first time, there was something there he hadn't noticed before. Not just fear, but hatred. Deep, unshaken, unwavering hatred. His father let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. She's always been good at twisting things, hasn't she? His mother's hands trembled, but she didn't back down. You don't get to stand here and act like you didn't destroy everything, she snapped. His father's expression hardened. You ran because you were scared. But you were scared of the wrong person. The young man felt his stomach turn. Scared of who? His mother hesitated. His father took a deep breath. Your mother didn't just take you away from me, he said. She took you away from the people who really wanted you gone. A cold chill ran down his spine. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His father's jaw clenched. My family, he said. Your grandparents. His mother flinched. You don't understand what it was like, she whispered. They didn't want me. They didn't want us. They were going to take you away. The young man's breath hitched. What? His father exhaled. They never approved of her. And when you were born, they told me I had to choose. Them, or you. His mother's voice broke. And he chose them. Silence hung heavy in the air. His father didn't deny it. He just stared at the floor, jaw clenched, hands in fists. The young man felt his entire body go numb. The truth wasn't black and white. It wasn't a simple story of right or wrong. It was complicated. Messy. And it had cost him his entire childhood. His mother had taken him to protect him, but she had also taken him away from a father who, at some point, had let him go. His voice was shaky when he spoke. Why are you here now? His father met his eyes. Because I made the wrong choice. And I've been trying to fix it ever since. His mother shook her head, her voice laced with pain. You don't just get to come back and fix things. He's not a child anymore. He's his own person now. The young man swallowed hard. He wasn't sure how to feel. A part of him wanted to hate his father. A part of him wanted to forgive him. And a part of him just wanted to breathe. Finally, he took a step back. I need time, he said. I can't do this right now. His mother reached for him, but this time, he stepped away. His father nodded slowly. I understand. His mother's face crumbled, but she didn't argue. His sister finally spoke. No matter what happens, you're not alone. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, he saw not just a stranger but someone who had been waiting for him. He turned toward the door. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he needed space to figure out what was next. As he stepped outside, the night air was cool against his skin. The world around him was still moving, people laughing, cars honking, life going on. And for the first time in his life, he had to decide for himself where he belonged.